It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning, everyone. On today's show, we'll talk to the New York City Health Commissioner, Dr. Alistair Martin, about the Legionnaire's disease outbreak on the Upper East Side and what the city is doing and what you need to do to protect yourself if you're in an affected area. We'll get a take on how the United States and Iran are kind of stuck in a power struggle for control of the Strait of Hormuz that at the moment both sides are losing after another embarrassing climb down by President Trump yesterday. How can this actually end? We'll break things up in the middle of the show with a 10-question World Cup quiz on this day of the second semifinal. Get 2 in a row right and win a WNYC bucket hat. And we'll have the former publisher of El Diario La Prensa, now the New York State Commissioner of the Division of Criminal Justice Services, Rossana Rosado. She has a new memoir called Bronx Attitude. And speaking of having a Bronx attitude, after the New York primary last month, we invited the winners of all 5 of the really competitive races to come on the show, the races for Congress, for brief interviews after their victories and what comes next. As many of you know, we had held candidate forums on the show in each of those races. So far, we've had Brad Lander, Claire Valdez, and Kate Conley, who won their primaries. We're about to speak with Darializa Avila Chevalier. We're working with Michael Lasher to schedule a time with him after he won the primary to succeed Gerald Nadler, so look for that on a future show. Darializa Avila Chevalier is with us now, along with Brad Lander and Claire Valdez. She was one of the 3 Democratic socialists endorsed by Mayor Mamdani. In what was probably the biggest upset, she defeated incumbent Congressman Adriano Espaillat, as many of you know, in Upper Manhattan and nearby parts of the Bronx. In this very blue district, this almost certainly means she is going to Congress next January. Ms. Chevalier, thanks for coming on again, and congratulations on winning your primary.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk with you, Brian.
And listeners, remember these post-election segments are not to debate the candidates' views. We did that during the campaigns. These are more like getting to know you interviews for the winners, so just so you know what to expect. Can I start as hopefully a service to you and our listeners by just asking you to say your name? I feel like I've heard it 5 different ways in 5 different media outlets, and I want everybody to get it right. This happened with Mamdani, some people intentionally, I think, and some not. So for the record, would you say your full name?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I say it 2 ways. One in full Spanish, so Darializa Avila Chevalier, and the other, just for a little more accessible to folks, Darializa Avila Chevalier.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
And you had it correct, so thank you, Brian.
Thank you. And okay, all my colleagues in the media, take notes. You grew up in Florida, I see, before attending Columbia University here. And I read your maternal grandfather had fled the Dominican Republic after protesting the Trujillo dictatorship there. Is that right? And do you think that heritage contributed to you becoming an activist?
Yeah, so my grandfather, he was part of the resistance in the Dominican Republic against the U.S.-backed dictator there, Trujillo. And, you know, he did leave for a bit, but he eventually went back to the Dominican Republic. And, you know, his story is something that has really inspired me growing up. And, you know, recently I was talking to my grandmother, and I was asking her to tell me a little bit more just about what it was like for him. And she was telling me, you know, they used to call him a communist. They would call him a radical. But the reality was that he was just someone who could not tolerate to watch people suffer. And so I've always wondered in myself, like, where that comes from. And when she said that, it very much clicked for me, because I've always felt it very viscerally in my body, wanting to be able to do something when I see the suffering of other people, and trying to find where I do have power to change those conditions for folks. And so, you know, I think that legacy and his legacy, right, is something that has deeply shaped me and my upbringing.
Maybe it's worth describing your background in activism a little bit. Maybe our listeners know you were a leader in the Columbia University pro-Palestinian divestment protest in 2024. but they may not know that you had done a lot before that, like protesting for the removal of the Central Park statue of gynecologist Marion Sims because of his exploitative experiments on enslaved black women, and that statue was removed. You also worked for the release of a person from ICE detention during President Trump's first term. So how would you describe your life in activism so far, and what has motivated it the most?
Yeah, I started out as a student organizer on campus, and I began doing work to end sexual violence on campus, was doing work around Palestine with Students for Justice in Palestine, was doing a lot of work with the Black Student Organization, which was very much about organizing, right? Black students, which I think in a lot of university campuses is usually called the Black Student Union, but at Columbia, it was very much about organizing. And, that really shaped a lot of my outlook after college and what I wanted to be doing. And it really taught me what it means to be a neighbor, right? And to build community with folks. And so I got really invested in working with Black Youth Project 100 after college, where we were doing a lot of work to, a lot of mutual aid work, a lot of work with the statue that you mentioned, work that was about bringing folks into organizing and into community around building the kinds of communities that we want to see, and especially in communities that have so often been abandoned by our representatives and by government. And so I was doing that work. I was also doing work around immigration justice and with Families for Freedom, and working to get folks out of ICE detention and connecting folks who are inside with their family members, because a lot of people don't know that when you're picked up by ICE, you often don't have access. Most people don't remember phone numbers anymore, right? It's just saved in your cell phone. And if you don't have your cell phone,
Right.
you can't contact your family. And so people just don't know where their loved ones are. And so they would call us, we would connect them to find their family members and things of the sort, and work to organize to get people out, as well as push for policy changes. And,
So that's
yeah, and that
that's
work
a
led
lot
to
of different
my,
things. Go
yeah, and
ahead,
that
and
work
that
led
work
to my, it
your
led to my research when I eventually went into grad school studying sociology. And that's where I was really looking into questions of why our government and our systems uh, work the way that they do, particularly as it relates to the deportation machine and how it impacts Afro-Latino communities in New York City.
But now you're making that leap that activists sometimes make from being an outsider to holding power, presuming you're elected in November, and being a member of the government. How does it feel to be moving into a government that you have dedicated so much of your life so far to protesting the actions of when you disagreed with them?
I have been really sitting with the fact that entrenched power just seems really untouchable and inevitable. But then I remember that narrative really only serves the powerful few. It only serves the people who want to maintain the status quo. And this campaign was a fight in every way, but it was a fight that was done in community. And I'm so grateful to every single person who has put in an ounce of energy into this campaign, because that's the way that we move forward. That's how we can actually change these systems to actually serve our communities. There's an old proverb: "How do you eat an elephant? Bite by bite." And that's what this campaign felt like. Oftentimes it just felt that the power we were trying to overcome, the decades-long political machines, that was really overwhelming. But it's fighting back against these institutional powers with our community, with people, that is really what's going to change and transform our society, because everything that's done in this world that's worthwhile is done with others. And I'm so grateful to everyone. I'm so proud of the fact that we won a multiracial, multi-generational, multi-religious coalition, and that really is how we attain this vision, right? A vision where everyone has housing for all, where our tax dollars come back and invest in our communities and not in wars abroad, and that is actually serving the working class people of this district.
Do you know what committees or caucuses you would like to be a member of yet?
So we've been thinking a lot about this, and I think it's gonna, that's really being shaped by what our priorities are politically. And for me, that is making sure that we are winning housing for all, that we are bringing down the cost of living here in the city that's just become so unaffordable, and making sure that we're eradicating childhood poverty. I think those two things are really at the heart of what has made it so difficult for New Yorkers to be able to afford to stay in New York. And if we are able to pass the reinstate the child tax credit and expand it, making sure that we are fully funding NYCHA, that we are bringing down the cost of rent and holding bad landlords accountable, I think that will change a lot of people's lives. And so that's how we're thinking through committees and those types of strategic decisions.
Of the three of you endorsed by Mayor Mamdani, you seem to be drawing the most attention as a lightning rod for the right because of your old tweets and your more recent comments about them. We're not going to go over them again today as we did during the campaign with some of them when you were here for that. But you've held some positions that other DSA winners maybe have not, or been more out there about them. My question about that today is, do you like that reputation and drawing that fire, like you're going to be maybe a prominent lightning rod, like how AOC came in or something like that? Or would you rather put all that behind you, start fresh in Congress on the issues you've been delineating here in the last few minutes, and be judged from there?
My priority is to deliver for the people of this district. We have so many issues that are impacting our day-to-day lives, and that is what I want to focus on. And I think some of what folks on the right or even folks in the center have been talking about, right, and the language they've been using has really been more of the politics of distraction that has taken attention away from the bread and butter issues that New Yorkers need addressed, right? We need housing addressed. We need our rates of poverty addressed. And, I'm really excited to work with anybody in Congress who's willing to take on those fights with me. I'm an organizer, and at the end of the day, what I do is bring people together. There are no two people who are completely in agreement on every single thing, right? That is not the point. The point is to make sure that we can find the things that we do agree on, that we can come together on, and fight to deliver for working class people in this country.
And you are part of the widening spectrum of views, I think we can call it, within the Democratic Party now. And we're getting multiple points of view from multiple guests on that on the show. Yesterday, we had Democratic Congressman Tom Suozzi, who's making a point since the primary and since Mayor Mamdani's election last year of calling himself a Democratic capitalist, in contrast to those of you, of course, calling yourself Democratic socialists. We played a clip of the mayor for Congressman Suozzi to react to yesterday. We'll play a clip of Suozzi here for you to react to. Listen.
I think it's important to recognize that our system of our economy in the United States of America has been the envy of the world. And a system based upon competition has resulted in more innovation, has lifted more people out of poverty, has made people's lives better. There are very rough edges that come with capitalism. Fortunately, we have a system of democracy in our country that says all men and women are created equal. And even if you're not a good competitor, you should still have a decent life. You shouldn't be relegated to a life of misery. So there are many things that capitalism has not done a good job on in our country, especially currently with income inequality and with not enough people having affordable health insurance or housing or facing different problems we have today. But the best system throughout history has been capitalism, not socialism.
Congressman Suozzi of Queens and Nassau here yesterday. Your reaction to that, and are you maybe for many of the same things listening to him there, but you use the different labels of capitalist and socialist as starting points?
I'm not quite sure what a democratic capitalist is. I will start there, but I do think that some of the most popular programs that we've had in U.S. history are democratic socialist programs. Things like Social Security, like Medicare, and even historically, the New Deal, right, was one of the most popular programs in this country's history. And right now, what we're seeing is a moment where people are deeply dissatisfied with so much of our social fabric and social infrastructure, right, where we are dissatisfied with our healthcare system. And folks are rationing their insulin because they can't afford the basic costs of care. And so we need to make those costs more affordable as, these insurance companies that keep price gouging, making sure that, and these drug companies that continue that price gouging.
But he would say all that. He would say all that too, right?
Right. But those are the solution to that is a democratic socialist program like Medicare for All, right? And I think that at the end of the day, democratic socialism is about making sure that the working class people who built the wealth that our country benefits from, that they can directly benefit from it as well. And we do that by, electing folks who want to push for these democratic socialist policies that invest in our communities, invest in working class people. And at the end of the day, the system that we have right now, far too many people are suffering from it. And we need an economy of care and not an economy of exploitation.
Has there been a most successful model of socialism anywhere in the world outside the United States in terms of both human rights and widespread economic justice that you would point to emulate? Because you know what the critics say, right? They're always going to point to the worst examples, the Soviet Union, some of the dictatorships in Latin America at various times, communist China, things like that.
I think that there's a lot we can learn from many parts of the world. I think places in Europe, like Sweden and Norway, for example. But I think looking specifically at the programs themselves, like what are the models of the programs and how can we implement them here, are how I envision this, right? And I think the other thing that gets lost is that is the democratic part of this phrase, democratic socialism, right? Is that we are making decisions in a democratic way about how we use the wealth that we have produced in this society, because the people who are producing the wealth are the people who produce the labor, the workers, right? It is not owning something that makes this country wealthier. It is the product of the labor of the working people. And so we should be able to come to decisions about how we use that wealth, right? And things like Medicare for All are programs that are not only popular, they've been proven to work in places like Sweden and Norway and across Europe and even Latin America, right? And so making sure that we are fighting for things like free college, free universal health care, free, just programs that have been proven to better the lives of working people. Even the child tax credit, for example, was one of the most popular programs that we've had in recent history. And it was cruel to end it. We should have never ended it because it brought childhood poverty to historic lows. And had we expanded it, we could have eradicated childhood poverty.
I want to give you a chance to comment on a story in the news today that is, I think, accurate to say somewhat relevant to you because I know you're personally close with Mahmoud Khalil, your fellow Colombia protest leader who the Trump administration is trying to deport. But he is now suing Trump administration officials and others. It was announced yesterday. As the New York Times reports it, Mr. Khalil will seek to convince a judge that the defendants coordinated to a degree that amounted to a conspiracy. His lawyers argue that there was a direct line leading from a Heritage Foundation plan to dismantle pro-Palestinian activism to the targeting of activists like Mr. Khalil by Canary Mission and Beitar, which led to their arrests and detention by the Trump administration. The Times does call it a long-shot lawsuit, but they also say it's being brought under a statute enacted in 1871 to obstruct the activities of the Ku Klux Klan. It says the law prevents any person from conspiring to deprive a person of protection under the law. So Mr. Khalil is asking for a judge to declare that efforts to deport him are part of a conspiracy, unquote, all of that from the New York Times. I'm sure you support this lawsuit. Would you like to say anything about why you think he could win? I know you've been working in a law office, though you're not a lawyer. I don't know if you want to say anything about that this morning.
Yeah, I can't comment on the legal aspects of it. As to your point, I'm not a lawyer, but I do think that what I witnessed happening was what he's describing, right? Was far right, just people and sometimes anonymous accounts, right? That we had no idea where they were coming from. Really, coming down on students, on very young people, and engaging in a lot of fear mongering and just reporting them to their institutions, to their schools, the very institutions that were supposed to be protecting them. And what that led eventually to was this campaign against folks like Mahmoud and others and students to have them, suffer these consequences for simply engaging in free speech, for simply advocating for, in Mahmoud's case, the rights of his people to live in dignity and to not be slaughtered, right? And I'm someone who has been doxxed in the past for my own activism, and I know how scary that can be. And so I think it's just incredible to me, the bravery that so many organizers, including Mahmoud, have shown in the face of all of this. And we know that the Trump administration was using him as, an example. He said that Mahmoud would be the blueprint for how ICE would be engaging going forward. And so, I think there are very strong, there's a strong narrative there, right? That, again, I can't comment on the legality of it because I'm not a lawyer, but I do think there is a strong narrative case there to show, right, that this was done in coordination with people who were really set on attacking student protesters.
So last question, what kind of a relationship, if any, do you think you'll have with Columbia University, your alma mater, after helping to lead the protests there? The right in Congress and the White House have been going hard after Columbia's funding, as you know, but you also are critical of the school from your perspective for the way they handled the protests and Khalil and Mossam Nasawi and, what became their detention. And now you will represent Columbia in Congress because the school is in your district. Do you have an approach or an agenda for that?
I have made it very clear that my priority is the working people of this district and making sure that we're delivering for them. And I think my criticisms of Columbia have always been rooted in the way that it has engaged with the community and the fact that it has contributed to the rising costs of people here and the displacement of so many in Harlem and Washington Heights. And so my priority is making sure that Columbia is a good neighbor. And I think, that requires us to obviously have a good relationship with Columbia as someone who is going to be representing them in Congress. But that also means good relationships also mean making sure that we are holding one another accountable to what it means to be a good neighbor. And, I'm hopeful that we can work towards that together. And I'm looking forward to those conversations so that we can make sure we're delivering for folks here.
Darializa Avila Chevalier, thanks for doing this post-primary victory segment. Congratulations again. And assuming November goes as people expect, we look forward to having you on when we call you Congress member. Thanks very much for today.
Thanks so much, Brian. Take care.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.
The United States is about to mark its 250th anniversary.
And so on the Global Story podcast from the BBC, we're telling surprising tales of American influence on the world stage and in ordinary people's lives all across the globe.
We have this ability to export our story, and a lot of people bought it.
I feel like the American dream is alive but not well.
From the BBC, it's the United States at 250.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts or find us on YouTube.